Hi again. What affects the look of a photo? It boils down to some very basic things. The camera. And we're talking digital here. If we were talking film, then obviously the actual film itself would contribute to the look of the camera, but we're talking digital. So we're talking the camera, the body, the sensor, and the lens. There's really not much else I can't think of that contributes towards the look of a photo. And what is the look? You might not have even thought about it. And I'm sorry, I've gone very dark again. I have no idea why this camera is doing this. It's got a mind of its own, as cameras do. Let me just move back a little bit over here. Maybe it's getting confused. Right. For many people, I think a photo is a photo. And they see a photo that stands out. And they don't really understand what makes it stand out. What it is about that photo that makes it different to most other photos I have seen. When I look back at my photography, and back to the days when I was using the D700 quite a lot, those photos, and I've made several videos on this, and by the way, if you haven't seen those videos, if you subscribe, hit the bell, you will get notified of new videos, and of course you can always go back and look at some of the other ones I've done. Pitch over. Some videos on the D700 where there was something about the look of the D700 photos which I compared to the D780 that I now use for my weddings. And the D780 definitely had something about it. It was really hard to put your finger on it, but you could take the same lens, put it on both cameras, take a shot, and the D700 was just more kind of arty. I think what it is that the way it renders colour is one thing, and the way the sensor captures shadows and light is another. And I'll be honest, and I think that modern cameras have gone too far. I think cameras like the Sony A7 III that I had for 2 years, and maybe even the D780 and the Z5 that I've got, maybe they've gone too far. And they're producing images which are basically just reality. I think if you go back to some of the older cameras, they had imperfections. They didn't have such a stupidly huge dynamic range. And sometimes the dark shadows were just black. You couldn't recover them. But in some ways, those imperfections actually created a nice looking image. My thoughts, my view on what makes a good image. One of the cameras that I've always lusted after, if you want, would be a Leica rangefinder, a Leica M9 in particular, because that camera has a CCD sensor, which is kind of old technology. To the point which the sensors have to be replaced quite often because they actually corrode. But the sensors from the M9 seem to give these same sort of imperfect photos and treat colours in a certain way that make the photo look really good. Combine that with a lens. Again, when I had the Sony A7 III, and I'm picking on the A7 III because I've used Nikon all my life apart from the 2 years with Sony, and that was 2 years of getting smartphone pictures. I never liked the pictures from the Sony. I didn't like the way it worked. I didn't like the handling. I'm so glad I've gone back to Nikon. But if you've got a Sony, don't be offended. That's just my view. Other than that, it's a great camera, and you can of course fix a lot of this stuff in Lightroom if you're prepared to actually go to the trouble of doing that. But I found the lenses that I bought for the Sony, which was a 35, 50 and 85 1.4 prime lenses, also suffered from over digital look. They just looked like perfect images. There's no light fall off at the corners. There's very little loss of sharpness as you go across the frame. not too much chromatic aberration, not much flare if there's any light hitting the lens. They're just too good. The look that I want for my photos that I give my wedding clients is something with more character, more artistry, and that doesn't involve me in spending 10 minutes on every photo to do something to make it look good. I want it to look good out of camera. So I've always admired, as I say, the Leica, and Leica lenses, of course, are probably the best in the world. Also the most expensive lenses in the world. So I've never really even thought about trying to create the Leica Look. And if you don't know what that is, type it into Google. You will get hundreds of photos which you will see the Leica Look. And basically, I think it's dark shadows, not blown out highlights, but quite a bit of contrast. It's a very, very shallow depth of field with just the subject being in focus and everything in the foreground and background being out of focus in a really sort of dreamy, creamy sort of way. And slightly desaturated colours probably, but maybe not. But something about the colours as well. And that for me is the Leica Look. Now, I've used Nikon lenses, I've used loads of Nikon lenses, and some of those I absolutely love. Probably the 135 f2 defocus lens gives absolutely unique, beautiful images, but it's really only useful as a portrait lens. Even if you try and get a kind of top half shot, you're going to have to be going back a long way to get that. You're not going to get any background in there unless you're 50 meters away. So it's really too long for most of the shots I do at weddings. I've got the 85 1.4 D lens. Now this is a D lens, it's an older lens, it's got some imperfections. It's not as, I think it's actually as sharp as the 85 1.4 G lens, which costs about 4 times as much. I think it is as sharp in the middle, but maybe there's some sharpness fall off as you get to the edge. And there's various other imperfections, but it does give beautiful looking images, and I use that at every wedding. But I still wouldn't say it gets the Leica Look. However, I've recently, and I'm talking about 5 or 6 weddings ago, bought another lens just to try it out, just to see how it worked, and I've actually fallen in love with it, and it is starting to transform, make a big difference to some of the photos I take at a wedding. And the lens in question is this little guy here. This is the Nikon 50mm 1.2 AI lens. So it's a manual focus lens which fits onto the FTZ adapter, and with the Z5 is a lovely little small package. And if you've seen it in my other videos, you'll know that the reason I got the Z5 is so that I can mix with the crowd, and I can get in there and I can just sort of get shots, and I'm not too much, people aren't going to notice me and take the problem with people at a wedding is they see the wedding photographer and they're not being themselves. I want genuine, real photos at a wedding. I do a few pose shots, obviously. Most of the shots I want to be real. And you get up to someone and you start pointing that at them, and it's pretty obvious you're the photographer and you're going to be taking their picture. This is a very, very quiet compared to the D780, and it's a lot smaller, and it's just, I find it just enables me to get more genuine, more real photographs. And with that lens on, I have now discovered a way to get a Leica looking photos. Let me jump over to the computer. I'll show you a few of the photos I've taken over the last few weddings and see what you think. So here is, I've forgotten her name now. Anyway, here she is. This totally unposed, nothing put together. The bridesmaid's just putting her veil on. And it has that look. We have some very dark shadows. We haven't got any blown highlights at all, but we've got a huge separation in focus between her face and the reflection in the mirror. And that mirror, this was a very small bedroom, that mirror was probably only a foot behind her, and yet it's just a wash of colour. The same wedding, the bridesmaids before they got ready. Again, just really dark, but with correct exposure on the subject, still enough of a background to be able to work out what the scene is about. And I think that's the beauty of a 50mm lens. It allows you, with a 1.2 aperture, to isolate your subject from the rest of the shot, but depending on the actual shot, of course, not completely lose the environment and the setting. Again, completely unnoticed. She was engrossed in what she was doing. I'm not sure what it was, but completely candid shot. Another completely candid shot. Really, really dark shadows, bright highlights, separation of the subject from the rest of the scene. Exactly the same sort of thing there. So these were all shot with the 50mm 1.2 AI lens, and if I'd have taken this with the 85 lens, I would have had to be, well, I couldn't have got it actually because I was standing with my back towards the wall, on a wall. I couldn't have got any further back, so this would have ended being up just a sort of head and shoulders shot. Whereas with the 50, I've got some beautiful colours in the background, and the way the lens, obviously it's the Z5, it seems somehow to transmit light differently to the camera, to give a different look straight out of camera to what I get with any other lens that I've got. So I think, oh, I like that one as well. Anyway, this is the look that I believe that you get with a Leica camera, and I'll explain more about that in a second. Let me just say on this one, if you think that this is a vintage lens, it was designed in 1981, it was first produced in 1981, it is still, I'm told, in production now. This isn't brand new, it is almost new. It's in the original box with all the proper stuff and the original labels and everything. And you would maybe expect a lens at 1.2 not to be wonderfully sharp. Now I can't actually promise that this was shot at 1.2. It may have been that I stopped down to maybe f2, f2.2 or something like that. But there's the sort of detail that you can get from this lens. A similar shot of the same bride, of course. Okay, so I think you get the idea. And with the right sort of preset in Lightroom that I can apply just as I import the photos, it enhances the Leica Look, and then literally 15-20 seconds working on each photo, I can get it to look like those. There's no huge amount of time required to get those sort of shots. Sorry, those sort of photos. What about using the lens? It's manual focus. It's 2021. Who wants to do manual focus in 2021? I have to admit, when I walk into the bride's prep, which is when I normally start a wedding, with this guy, I am much more apprehensive than I would be if I stuck my 50mm 1.8G lens on there, which obviously is autofocus, because I know I've got the challenge of manual focusing. 2 minutes later, I've completely forgotten about it because I'm just focused on doing what I'm doing. But it is a bit of a challenge, especially if you're going to shoot at 1.2. It requires no setup on the camera. You just pop the lens on. The camera recognises that it's a non-CPU lens, and you just get on with it. You can go in and set the non-CPU lens data up and set the maximum aperture and the focal length. At least it will then come up on Lightroom. It will tell you this is the 50mm 1.2 lens, so you know which lens it was shot with. But it won't tell you what the aperture is because there's no electrical connections at all. And as you open and close the aperture, it doesn't tell the camera anything. The focusing ring on this lens is gorgeous. It's different to all the Nikon lenses that I've used. Nikon lenses and all the other lenses I've used, actually, Sigmas, Tamrons, I've got a manual focusing ring, but they're not specifically designed as manual focus lenses, and that makes a difference. This is just very, very creamy, if you like. It's very easy to use. With focus peaking, sorry, I could not use this on a DSLR. I wouldn't even try and use it on the D780. Not unless you're using live view. If you use the optical viewfinder with just a little dot in the corner to tell you that it's in focus, a complete waste of time. It's just never going to work. On a mirrorless camera with focus peaking, you can see what it's focused on, obviously, and you can, with practice, judge very closely how much you need to move to focus on what you want to actually focus on. You can fine tune the focus, and I find I don't need to use zoom to get critical focus, providing I'm more than 2 meters away from my subject. If I'm 2 meters or more away, there is no point in zooming in, and I've set a button to zoom in, so I just click the button, I'm zoomed in, click it again, I've zoomed out. And a point on that, by the way, let me just digress. If you do use zoom on a manual focus lens at 1.2, I get as close as I need to, then I'll zoom in and I won't touch the focus ring again. You just rock back and forth by a couple of millimeters and that will get you perfect focus. If you try and stand still and focus with the focus ring, you are actually moving backwards and forwards, because just to keep balance, you do rock back and forth by a couple of millimeters. And if you're trying to focus with this as well, you've got one working against the other, and it becomes very difficult. So when you zoom in with a lens like this, forget about moving the focus ring. As I say, just let yourself rock back and forth a little bit and try and stay still. When you get to the right place, take the shot. If I was closer than 2 meters, yes, I would zoom in. And it becomes quite quick. It's not a lens that you can use for moving subjects. That's not quite true. I have actually done it at a birthday party a couple of weeks ago. I stopped down to about 5.668 f8, I'm not sure, something like that. So I've got a much wider depth of field, focus, and then you're okay to shoot people moving sideways, back and forth a little bit, not walking towards you obviously, but you can actually focus on moving subjects. But you won't get that super shallow depth of field, of course. But if you pick the right shots, as I've shown there, it gives absolutely beautiful photos. And this, I think, is comparable to a Leica. Those quality of those photos now with this lens, and we're looking here at lens and camera, a couple of thousand, just over a couple of thousand, as compared to getting on for 10,000 for Leica with a Noctilux lens. That's my thoughts. I'm in love with this. I really am. Got a wedding not tomorrow, Wednesday, and I can't wait to get back there and get some more shots. Let me know your thoughts about manual focusing, about the Leica Look, anything else. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you found that interesting. Cheers.